Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Numerics with Nadia. In today's lesson, we're going to go over the properties of quadrilaterals. This is kind of piggybacking off of the last video we did. The last video was classifying two-dimensional shapes. We went over the different types of quadrilaterals and what determines a polygon versus not a polygon. So I would definitely recommend watching that video prior to this one. But for today's lesson, we're going to go over a lot of new terms for our vocabulary. We're going to also define them. So these terms are going to be very important in all of the remainder of the geometry videos that we're going to have here. And then we'll also go through the properties of quadrilaterals. So let's get into our vocab for today's lesson. I would go through your notebook and just pick a page and have it be your vocab page, because we're going to continue adding to this every single video from now on. So I would just have a dedicated vocab page. And now we will get to our first vocab word, which means parallel. So the definition of parallel is two or more straight lines that continue forever and never intersect. And to intersect means that they cross, right? So these lines are straight lines, they continue forever, and they will never cross. For each one of these vocab words, we're going to draw out what the example looks like, and if there's any type of geometric notation we need to know, we will draw that out as well. So here is an example of what two parallel lines look like, right? They're straight, they never intersect, and they have the arrows on the end, which means that they're going to continue forever. And the notation we would put on these lines to classify that they're parallel kind of looks like a greater than sign, right? So we'll go through and add those two in, and that is our definition of parallel. Now we'll move on to our second vocab word. Our second vocab word is adjacent. And when two lines or two angles are adjacent, all that means is that they are side by side. So the little shorthand version I like to refer to it as is just that they're next to each other, right? So this word can be used for both lines and angles, whereas parallel just describes lines. So now that we've defined what adjacent means, let's draw out an example. Here we have two lines. They are next to each other, right? With this little angle in between. And those two lines, we would classify them as adjacent, right? Because they are next to each other. There's no other line, nothing else going on. So they would be adjacent. And there isn't anything, any type of notation for us to know here. So parallel and adjacent are our first two vocab words. Go ahead and copy those down before we move on to our next vocab word. So the last vocab word we're going to go over in this video is called a right angle. So a right angle can be defined as an angle that measures exactly 90 degrees, okay? No less, no more, not even by a single degree. Right angles measure exactly 90 degrees. And now we'll go through and draw out an example. So the way that the example would look, normally it's when two lines cross, and they cross in this exact manner, which we'll go over what this term means a little bit later as well. But when they cross in this manner, they form a 90-degree angle. And the notation that we have for this is kind of like an upside down L. So we'll just go through and label that. And that is how a right angle would look. That's how we would spot it. And that is the definition of it. So now that we've gone through all three of our vocab words, let's go through this little visual I've put together for you guys. This visual has all of the shapes that we went through in our last video, but it also has their properties. So let's start up at the top. The first type of quadrilateral we'll look at is a rectangle, and let's look at its properties. So a rectangle has four right angles. You can see them. They kind of look like the squares in the corners, right? So it has four right angles, and the opposite sides here are equal. So the shorter sides are equal to each other and the longer sides are equal to each other. Now let's look at a square. So a square also has four right angles, but all of its sides are equal. So the difference between a rectangle and a square is that a square, all of the sides are equal, and then in a rectangle, there's two sets of equal sides. Now we'll look at the parallelogram. For the parallelogram, we have two pairs of parallel lines. We can see them because we defined that already, right? And they are shown with those little arrow marks. Since we have two sets, the first set has one arrow and then the second set has two, just so we can differentiate that we have two sets. But we have two pairs of parallel sides, and we also have that the opposite sides are equal. Our next shape is a rhombus. A rhombus is basically a parallelogram, but all the sides are equal. So a rhombus and a square all have equal sides, and then a parallelogram and a rectangle, they have two pairs of equal sides, right? And now we'll look at a trapezoid. For a trapezoid, two sides are parallel, so we see that labeled with the arrows. And then our last shape would be a kite. And for a kite, we have that two pairs of adjacent sides of the same length. So adjacent, right, it means next to. So the two top angles that are next to each other, well, those are equal. And then the two bottom angles that are next to each other, those are equal. And that is shown with those two tick marks to show that the length are equal for the kites. So now that we've gone through all of our vocab words and all of the properties, let's get into our practice section for today. So the directions say to name the quadrilateral based on the given properties. So for all these practice questions, we're going to be given the property and we can match it with the name of the quadrilateral that it's referring to. So for number one, it says, what shape has four right angles and four equal sides? So in order to figure out what this quadrilateral could be, let's try to draw it out. So it has four right angles and four equal sides, and that looks like a square to me, right? So for number one, we would have square. For number two, it says, what shape has two parallel sides? And notice how in the directions, it just says two parallel sides. There are other shapes that have two parallel sides and other properties, but the only shape that only has two parallel sides as its property is a trapezoid. So I've gone through and drawn that out for us here. For number three, we have what shape has two pairs of adjacent sides of the same length? So this one's a little bit trickier to think about, but let's just start drawing. For this one, it says two pairs of adjacent sides. We know that that means next to, right? And nothing about parallel, so let's go through. I've drawn it out here. We have the top two angles as adjacent and the bottom two angles. So number three would just be a kite. Now we'll move on to our fourth example. Number four says, what shape has two pairs of parallel sides and has opposite sides that are equal? So let's think about this one, and let's start by just drawing out what it would look like visually. If we start drawing it out, we see that this shape has two parallel sides, right, labeled with the arrows. And it has opposite sides that are equal. So number four would be a parallelogram. Now we'll move on to our fifth example for today. For number five, it says, what shape has four right angles and opposite sides that are equal? So let's try to visualize what this would look like. Four right angles and opposite sides that are equal. Well, that would look like this, right? We have our four right angles, which I'll label here, and then our opposite sides that are equal. The short sides are equal, the long sides are equal. So number five, well, we would classify that as a rectangle. And now we'll move on to our last question, our last shape of the day. For number six, it says, what shape is a parallelogram with four equal sides? So this one, let's just start by drawing out a parallelogram, but in this case, we have four equal sides. So it would look like this, and this shape, well, that would be a rhombus. All right, you guys, that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment down below any other videos you would like to see or any questions you have. Like the video if you enjoyed it, share this video with a friend, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys next time.